Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Jim Rooney, President and CEO of the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce, and I want to welcome you to today's Government Affairs Forum. Today, we're really pleased to welcome Massachusetts Attorney General Maura Healey as our guest speaker for this forum. We last heard from the Attorney General just about a year ago, and if you think about what life was like in June of 2020, it was the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the social reckoning our country was experiencing and continues to experience to this day. So we had quite a conversation a year ago, spoke at length about the impacts on Black and Brown communities in Massachusetts and how we as a society can do better. So today, I know we're all looking forward to hearing from the Attorney General on the state of the Commonwealth, how much progress we've made, the challenges ahead, and ways we can continue to do better as we reopen our economy and continue our racial reckoning. Before we get started, I want to begin a huge thank you to today's sponsor, Bank of America, our longstanding partner in the Government Affairs Forum series, helping to bring relevant content to our community. A special thanks to Massachusetts President Micheal Chamberlain for his leadership at Bank of America throughout the Commonwealth, engaging in so many issues in so many ways. We appreciate your support. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be shared on the Chamber's YouTube page shortly after the presentation. And we would ask our audience to be sure to submit your questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A feature on your screen. And you can also engage with other attendees via the chat feature. With that, it is my honor to introduce Attorney General Maura Healey. Since taking office, Attorney General Healey has placed much of her focus on confronting the opioid epidemic, reducing gun violence, enforcing civil rights, protecting consumers, and addressing the climate crisis head-on. The Attorney General has also championed access to health care and reproductive freedom. Before being elected as Attorney General, Maura served as the Chief of the Civil Rights Division, where she served as lead counsel in the country's first successful challenge to the Defense of Marriage Act. And on a more personal note, I'd like to thank the Attorney General during my tenure as Chamber President for her open door and willingness to collaborate, have conversations with the business community and all of us on so many issues that affect the conduct of business and commerce in the Commonwealth. It's always good to have that line of communication with the Attorney General's office. So with that, please join me in welcoming Attorney General Maura Healey.
Good morning, Jim. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you for our second virtual Chamber Zoom. I can't believe it, but I sure am looking forward to seeing you all in person soon. What a year this has been. It's really hard to sum up in words the loss, the lessons learned, and the change that's occurred in just the past year. A year ago when I was with you, George Floyd had just been brutally murdered for the world to see. We were a couple months into lockdown, essentially. The presidential primary wasn't even over. Since then, of course, every facet of our lives has been disrupted, and we've experienced some good things and some bad things. There's been a lot of heartbreak. Hundreds of thousands of people have died, and the deaths have been concentrated in many of our most vulnerable communities. So many are mourning the loss of a job, a business, or a home, loss of stability for our children. We learned a lot about resilience this year. I want to take a moment to thank Chamber members for everything you did to keep it together, to keep us strong, and to keep us moving forward. I think about the early days and how lucky we are to live in Massachusetts with this amazing collection of colleges and universities and research institutions and hospitals and healthcare providers, vaccine makers, who are absolutely integral to saving lives here in our state and saving lives across the country and the world. Just take a moment to just pat yourselves on the back for that and know that I am really grateful as a person in government I've had the opportunity to work with many of you, and what you did together and what people did together this year was truly amazing. I also want to shout out members who innovated and retooled from the early days of figuring out, well, we make X, maybe we can figure out a way to make face masks or some other PPE. I mean, that was happening around the state. The way people work together to deal with the fragility of the supply chain is really amazing. And I just think that, it's worth pausing to think about the resilience, think about the strength, and let's use that as an opportunity and a well to draw from as we move forward. We are so capable of so many great things in this state. And so much of it has to do with the business community, the innovation, the inspiration, the collaboration, and the can-do attitude represented in the likes on this morning's call. So thank you to all of you. And I know we're not out of the woods and there's a lot of work ahead, but I also think of that work, as challenging as it may be, and for general counsels on the calls figuring out return to work policies, good luck with all of that. We're all struggling with that. But more importantly, I think we have some opportunities as we move ahead to innovate and to keep in place some of the things that are really good and to abandon some of the things that haven't been so good. I think we also learned about the interconnectivity of our lives, whether it was understanding who really is an essential worker. And just a point here, I mean, for many of us to stay at home and work, more vulnerable people needed to go to work and face the virus over the last year in hospitals, nursing homes, grocery stores, distribution centers, and the like. And one of the things too that we learned through this is that without a robust childcare industry, women, unfortunately, were forced out of their jobs, and the implications for our economy are massive. I'll talk more about this, but I'm concerned that we may have wiped out decades of progress in just a few months. I'm sure many of you have lost valued employees, or you've already heard stories of folks who may not be able to come back. And of course, racial disparities across the country and right here in Massachusetts continue to be ever present. Innocent Black lives continue to be lost, whether it be through violence, discrimination, or poverty. One thing that we talked about when I was last here was the opportunity that the pandemic presented to us, that we could build anew. When I spoke with you, I had no idea that we would be in the pandemic for so long. But even then, I was viewing it as an opportunity. And here we are, a year or more later. I think this is the moment that we were talking about. We know what needs fixing. We know what innovations we should keep in place. And we know what ways of doing business we should let go. So today, I hope that we can have that conversation about what work looks like and how we can all benefit when we shrink disparities and lift vulnerable people up. I don't think we can move ahead as a society if we fail to protect people of color, low-income people, immigrants, the elderly, people with disabilities, and the LGBTQ community. These disparities are not by accident. They don't just happen. They're the result of bad policies, or oftentimes no policy at all. And I think in government, and you all as business leaders, we've got powerful voices and platforms to meaningfully advance equity and play a central role in fighting systemic racism. So many of you are already speaking up. I see CEO Action for Racial Equity. This was an initiative led by PwC, MassMutual, and others, representing more than 100 organizations. I love it. You guys are working together to identify, develop, and promote public policies and corporate engagement to address racism and social injustice. Let's keep this going, and let's take this moment to commit to acting with intentionality, with intention. I think about my own role leading the 600-person AGO team, Attorney General's Office team. Back in the office, we're re-examining every policy and action with a racial justice lens, with an equity lens. I've empowered my teams to think creatively and proactively about what sort of actions we can take with the power and the resources that we have. Just to name a few projects that have happened recently that reflect this equity lens and the intentionality that I'm talking about is on the environmental front. We released a report showing the alarming correlation between air pollution and COVID-19 rates in communities of color. We put that report out last summer. And from that, we recently funded the installation of 80 air quality sensors across Springfield to collect data on pollution hotspots and inform public health measures. Why did we do this? Well, Springfield, it turns out, is the asthma capital of America. 1 in 5 kids goes to the emergency room with asthma in Springfield. In America, not just our state, but the capital, asthma capital in America. So we've got a responsibility to do more to protect our residents from the toll of pollution. Our healthcare team, we launched a grant program to fund treatment and recovery services specifically for people of color. You know, with COVID, I understand the opioid crisis has fallen off the front pages, but it is worse. Massachusetts saw a record rate of overdose deaths last year, particularly among Black populations. So we're working in my office to direct funds into these communities to promote culturally humble and accessible services to the people now hit hardest by substance use disorder. My healthcare team, instead of issuing the usual cost trends report this fall, we put out a report that highlighted disparities in healthcare and the actions we need to take now to address that. Reducing costs that prevent people from seeking care or filling prescriptions, diversifying our healthcare workforce to represent the patients it serves, collecting robust data to hold ourselves accountable and track trends, and targeting funding into the social determinants of health, the things that really are at play, like social, economic, and environmental conditions that play such a huge role in determining health outcomes. Much like the rest of the work on racial inequality, our health equity analysis is based on an important theme, that budgets are a reflection of our values and that we need to focus on outcomes. Over the last year, my office has spent a lot of time on economic security. I mean, even before COVID, 60% of Americans couldn't cover a $1,000 expense in the event of an emergency. And then, of course, the pandemic. So many more families struggling, many for the first time. So we've been busy at work, making sure employees, workers are getting paid and working in safe conditions, working with community groups to help vulnerable families and landlords get rental assistance, stepping up enforcement of housing discrimination laws, and making sure that we were out there with resources in multiple languages across the state, assisting households to work with utilities in help paying their utility bills, returning millions of dollars back to consumers, partnering with Project Bread and the food banks to make sure that families struggling with food insecurity could access critical support. We did a great public service campaign with them. And as a result, applications and signups to the federal government to help people get those services, which are just passed through from the feds, went up 30%. And that's important because in Massachusetts last year, we saw a 60% increase in the rate of hunger in our state. Our state has the largest rate of increase in hunger in the country. So a lot of issues related to economic security, and I think we need to continue to be attentive to people's needs out there. Another area that I focused on, and I really hope you'll join me in this, I think it's super important, is voting rights. This past cycle, we convened a task force to protect voters from intimidation. We led voter education campaigns. And I think more importantly, we took steps, multi-state legal actions to assist governors, secretaries of state, election officials in other states as they were fighting efforts to suppress the freedom to vote. As you know from the paper and the news, that work continues. I think what's been made clear in the last year is that there are two forces in this country, those who are fighting to protect our democracy and those who are trying to undermine it. And I think there's a business case to be made for involvement in this space. This is not and should not be a partisan issue. I don't think you can have a stable, predictable economy and successful businesses if these fundamental American bedrock principles and institutions fail. And they are really threatened today. Across this country, Black voters are being disenfranchised. Arizona is just one example with its sham audit, but it's happening in other states. And of course, we've got this real issue with disinformation and violent rhetoric continuing to spread across digital spaces. In just the last year, in 47 states, almost every state in the country, more than 300 bills have been introduced that are targeted at suppressing the freedom to vote. We've heard about Florida and Texas, but it's happening here in New England. To the north of New Hampshire, the legislature is advancing a bill that would limit the ability of students there to vote. So the protection of democracy and the freedom to vote are going to remain a top priority for me. I hope you'll join me in this, because the powerful voice of the business community really makes a difference. And I ask you to all consider vocally supporting federal legislation like the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. I ask you to think carefully before throwing your money or support behind a candidate that would stand against the freedom to vote. Speak out against anti-democratic, small d, anti-democratic state legislation and create consequences for those dangerous power grabs that we're seeing. And I hope you encourage your employees to get active and participate and to vote. Whether it's through paid time off to vote or voter registration drives, I think this is healthy and essential for our democracy and our country. All of these issues that I'm talking about, environmental injustice, healthcare, opioids, economic security, voting rights, demand, though, in my view, an anti-racist and equitable response. Something that I also want to talk about this morning, and I know it's something on the minds of many of you, is what's happened to women and what's been so devastating for women in the workforce. I know the Chamber's Women's Network has shed an important light on this issue with its recent discussion of the She Session, and that's really what this is. I mean, back in the early months of 2020, let's remember, women actually outnumbered men in paid workforce. Now that has changed sharply. 3 million women have left the workforce since then. Of course, female-dominated businesses like restaurants, retail, and hospitality have seen major suffering, but it's others faced now with the difficulty of balancing remote schooling and childcare. Many women were just forced to quit. It did not make sense. And even as we see the glimmers of hope with our economy regaining strength and things opening back up, not everyone is recovering at the same place. In April, right, the Bureau of Labor Statistics put out its report. It's great, 355,000 men joined the workforce. 165 women dropped out. That is something. You know, when women are now on track to have the lowest workforce participation level since 1988, we've gone backwards more than 30 years. And it's become clear that Black and Latino women have been especially hard hit. They now face higher unemployment rates than white women. According to a recent study by the Mass Commission on the Status of Women, approximately 1 in 8 women of color who were in the workforce before COVID are now absent from it. That's double the rate of white women. The unemployment gap for Black and Latinx workers nationwide has significantly increased during COVID. Unemployment rates right now for Black and Latinx residents are more than double the statewide average. And part of what is fueling this, and particularly women leaving, we know has to do with childcare. And that's what I want to talk to you about next. We really have a chance, I think, right now to rethink and rebuild our systems to work better, especially when it comes to early education and childcare. From the beginning days of COVID, my office was receiving a ton of calls and emails from parents who were worried about having to pay high childcare costs for centers or classrooms that were closed. We also heard from low-income families who simply didn't have the means to continue payments at all. And we heard from childcare providers who were concerned about extended closures and how that was impacting revenue stream. And we know how it's impacted revenue stream. Since COVID, we've gone from 12,000 childcare providers in Massachusetts to 4,200 just through COVID. That's what's happened. And of course, many of those businesses are women-owned, are minority-owned. Center-based infant care costs an average of 21 grand a year in Massachusetts, the highest in the country, second highest in the country, I should say, after Washington, D.C. And we know in Greater Boston, the average family pays each year just over $35,000 for at-home care and nearly $15,000 for center-based care on average. That's a huge cost, way too unaffordable, expensive for too many families. And it's keeping people, especially women, out of the workforce. So after the strides we've made to get more women into the workforce, it's a tragic setback, not to mention, of course, the immediate and lasting impacts on our economy. You know, I also think about the fact that I don't think we've been paying our early educators nearly enough, and I appreciate the Chamber's advocacy on this over the years. These educators, you know, many would say the brain architects of our young people, our young children. 92% of them are female, 41% of them people of color. We're entrusting our children's earliest learning, and yet we're paying a national average of $10.70 an hour. Last week, I spoke with early education and childcare advocates on their weekly strategy call, and they gave me some really striking figures about what's happening there. We need to recognize that our childcare system is what it is. It's part of the public infrastructure that we need to support our families, our workforce, and our economy, and it's in crisis right now. I know you know this. I know you are grappling with this as employers. I think we need federal help. I led a letter and a demand to the Biden administration to increase by funding $50 billion through the American Rescue Plan, funding just for childcare. We got $40 billion, that's a good thing. That's a start, but it's only just a Band-Aid patch to address immediate needs. You know, I know here on the state level, I think we should be looking to do more to get us universal early education. Our current early education funding structure is based on an outdated model that does not reflect how parents engage in the workforce or what we know about the importance of early childhood education. Because what we know is that early education builds a foundation for lifelong learning and well-being by supporting children's development cognitively, physically, socially, and emotionally. So just like we want to ensure that students in K through 12 have access to educational opportunities supported by robust public funding, I don't think we should be leaving our youngest learners out of the equation. Universal access to early education will be good for business as well as for families, as this access will support greater workforce participation, will diversify applicant and talent pools. It just makes a lot of sense. Every dollar invested in early childhood education is expected to yield between $4 and $16 in return, increasing high school graduation and college enrollment rates, as well as personal earnings, while decreasing special ed costs, social welfare, and criminal justice system costs. What we spend in added childcare costs, we're going to save in other areas. It's going to increase tax revenue ultimately and economic growth. So I urge you to engage on this critical issue and to share your voices and your ideas as we make policy in this space. And that leads me to say something more about the role that employers can play in ensuring access to affordable, high-quality childcare. I know that many employers are planning to offer more flexible and generous childcare benefits. These are the kind of benefits that employees, the workforce, are desperately seeking. And I applaud some recent expansions. I mean, Verizon recently expanded its reimbursement program with a stipend of up to $100 a day for needed care. According to reports, this enabled more than 11,000 employees who used that benefit to stay in place. Female employee turnover rate remained at a record low there. I know many of you have been involved in the work of groups like the Massachusetts Business Coalition for Early Education and Childcare to help attract and retain a strong workforce and address gender and racial disparities. So think about these things. Can you offer membership to caregiver matching sites? Could you partner with organizations that help employees find high quality programs when school isn't in session? Could we pool resources with other companies to offer childcare where employees live or work. The bottom line, I know you know this, when families have reliable, affordable childcare, it helps businesses run and our economy thrive. And when children have access to high quality education and care, they become part of the well-educated workforce we need and want here in this state. Now, part of that is making sure that we recognize that educational and workforce development opportunities can't happen without a diverse pipeline of talented workers with the skills to meet your company's need. And to build that pipeline, again, we need to start young. Let's start by funding fully the Student Opportunity Act. But understand too that our schools need more. With students returning to school after months of remote or hybrid learning, we have to prioritize both their academic and their social emotional needs. These needs are greatest where the pandemic hit hardest. Students of color, immigrants, and low-income students, even before the pandemic, over 2/3 of our Black and Latino and low-income third grade students were not reading proficiently. Over the last year, rates of chronic absenteeism have skyrocketed too among these populations. So we've got to really work hard to address the educational opportunity gaps and apply this equity lens. And finally, I don't need to tell you this. I've spoken with many of you. We need to create more affordable career pathways to help close skills gaps and meet the needs of businesses across the state. Some talk about this as the talent gap. I've heard from so many employers who have talked about the fact that it's been difficult to find workers. And we've got industries here that are just taking off. I mean, life sciences, coding, AI, robotics. But we've got to make this a priority as a state. I know it's a priority for the chamber, and I applaud your working group on this. We have got to work to invest in and partner with our vocational technical schools, with our community colleges, figure out what is it that we need for workforce talent right now for the jobs of today, and what do we need to do in terms of education and training to supply that. Let's make it work, and let's make it work now, because businesses and industries that can really help drive the state, drive this region, and yield so much need that. And of course, all students, you want to go to school, you want to have a job, and a job that pays well, and an ability to support yourself and your family. I mean, let's just make sure that we're matched up, that we're synced up. That's not happening, in my view, to the degree that could be happening here in the state. I think it's absolutely essential to help those who lost work during the pandemic and to build a more diverse pipeline for tomorrow. But the business community, we've got to sync up with our educational community in order to really make this happen. And I hope that you are encouraged to bring your expertise around these issues and talk to lawmakers and policymakers about what needs to happen. Also bring your expertise around adaptation and innovation and investment to the discussion. I want to say a few things about the wage gap. I've talked about this with you before. It continues to be the case, though, that in Boston, for example, where I am, the average white household has a net worth of about $250,000. The average Black household, just $8. $8. So how do we begin to close that gap? Accumulation of wealth starts with being able to save a little bit of each paycheck. Closing the raw wage gap is an essential first step for Black and brown workers to achieve economic security and to have an opportunity to build and maintain wealth. And when I talk about wage gap, what I'm talking about is a measure across all jobs, not just the difference in pay between men and women or white people and people of color for doing the same or comparable job. Now, according to most recent Census Bureau data, for every dollar earned by white men, Latino men earn 91 cents, Black men 87 cents, white women 79 cents, Black women 63 cents, Latino women 55 cents. Put another way, Black women would have to work all of 2020 and straight through August of 2021 to earn what white men made in 2020. For Latino women, the date doesn't come until October. And here in Boston, data collected indicates that women on average earn 70 cents for every dollar earned by a man. Now, over the course of people's careers, we see how this plays out and how it limits their family's advancement. So the path to improving the racial and gender wealth gap starts with enhancing the earnings of women and people of color, and that means reducing and eliminating their wage gaps. 5 years ago, I was so proud to partner with the Chamber to help pass and implement a law to update the Massachusetts pay equity law. Your early support, your important voice were absolutely critical. And you didn't stop there with the passage of the law. Your members proactively audited your own pay practices and addressed any disparities that were found. And it was just great. And here we are again in this moment of racial reckoning, of building back a more equitable and resilient post-pandemic economy. And I believe it's time for us to take the next step towards racial and gender equality in our workplaces. If the current trends continue, the gender wage gap is expected to close by about 2059. That's 38 years from now. For Black and Latino women, it's 100 years away. So here's what I think we need to consider and do. Each of us as employers, needs to take a hard look at our own practices, just like we did around equal pay. Look at what is driving disparity. I know that many of you are addressing this head on already with efforts to increase opportunities and advancement for women and Black and Brown employees. HubSpot's Women Who Lead initiative seeks to advance women of color through engaging them with the community and encouraging action and discussion. Vertex's initiative to increase gender diversity has achieved measurable success in hiring women into C-suite positions. And I applaud the Chamber for your efforts to increase diversity on your own board and for challenging members to do the same. But I think that one thing to note is you can't fix what you don't measure. And I'm proud to stand with the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts, Amplify Latinx, the entire Wage Equity Now coalition, in calling for legislation that would require us as employers to report critical wage gap data and the demographics of earners. I mean, again, you can't fix what you don't measure. And I think we need to be intentional at looking at what's actually happening within our workplaces, not from a place of defensiveness, but through a recognition that this is going to actually make us all better. Now, some of your companies do that, as business abroad already requires certain reports on wage data. I think that's been the law that's been in effect in the UK, at least since 2017. And here's what some of that data shows. Earlier, I should say that here's what that shows. It does make a difference. Earlier this year, at least one state passed a similar law, similar to the UK's, and requiring that kind of reporting. And right now, I just challenge all of us, every company, to you're represented this morning, to run the numbers, to look at your own racial and gender wage gaps and commit to making the real measurable progress as we did for the original pay equity bill. As Chamber members, you know that equity and inclusion are critical for our region's economic growth and competitiveness. Studies show that employers with diverse leadership teams are more profitable, have lower turnover, and attract more qualified job applicants. A recent national study estimates that over the past 20 years, the racial wage gap has cost the US economy $2.7 trillion in additional income that would have otherwise been available for consumption or investment. And right here, kudos to the Massachusetts Taxpayers Foundation, who issued a report concluding that eliminating racial disparities in education, wages, housing, investments, and wealth would grow the Massachusetts gross state product by an estimated 0.85% annually, resulting in an increase of $25 billion over 5 years. Measuring these disparities and holding ourselves accountable as employers is a first step towards closing racial wage gaps and building back a more equitable economy. We're at this critical moment, as I said at the beginning. Yes, it's challenging, but I also think it's a real opportunity, an opportunity for Massachusetts to lead and to build back a more equitable economy. I want to work together with all of you on making all of this happen. There's a lot of work to do. As Jim alluded to at the outset, I've always enjoyed wonderful communication with the chamber and with its members. My team and I, we learn a lot from ongoing conversations, collaborations. We're looking for opportunities to partner. And again, I just want to thank you all for hanging in there this year, continuing to find ways to support your teams, your workforce and their families, and really to take from this experience the memory of the resilience and capacity that people have to get things done and to do good things. So Jim, thanks for having me this morning, and I look forward to people's questions.
Well, thank you, Attorney General Healey, for hitting on such a wide variety of issues that clearly affect the Commonwealth and its people, but also for doing it in a way that sort of connects the dots between the conduct of business and commerce and why it's important to the business community. I also found it interesting that you alluded to something that you and I have talked about, which is that laws can be passed, regulations can be put in place. We worked together on the women's pay equity legislation 5 years ago, but it's really about the culture and the putting into practice certain intentional measures to make those things happen that matter. So that partnership, that collaboration between government and the business community is so critical to all of the issues that you addressed. I did want to follow up on your bold call to action around voting rights, which, as you mentioned, is so fundamental to our democracy. And as you were doing that, I was thinking about the voice and power of the business community, not just here in Massachusetts, but throughout the country. And when the business community raises its voice and says, no, we're not going to stand for this or accept this, government in different states sometimes react. We saw that in certain states on transgender rights legislation, and other times that states have sort of gone in the wrong direction. In this case, is the business community voice loud enough on the voting rights sort of issues that are going on around the country?
Well, no, but it's not limited to the business community. I think we need a louder voice coming from all of us in government, in the public sphere, sure, in business. And I don't say this lightly, Jim. I understand that for business, it's sometimes a hard calculation. I mean, I've been there when businesses have taken positions, for example, around gun safety reform and, some of the vitriol, and this is just one example. I understand the calculus and the challenges sometimes that come with weighing in on issues of public policy. But I just want to be really clear with the audience, Jim, this is a really big one. This isn't just any other issue, This is fundamental. If you look at what has happened over the last year, and I've had too much of an inside view and a front row view through the litigations and the work that AGs have been involved with in more than 50 suits over the last year just to protect the damn access to the ballot in places. The links that people seem willing to go to for purposes of holding on to power is unbelievable to me. It's corrosive. It's a cancer in our democracy. And I don't ultimately think it's very good for business. I mean, we're America. We're the United States of America. We should not be headed to some sort of totalitarian, authoritarian regime. And I don't mean to be hyperbolic in those comments, but you got to see what's going on right now. And so I think the voice is incredibly important. Again, it's not about party. It's about, the fact that the voice, people's voice, the ability to give voice in a democracy is supposed to be through the vote. And we should be about, look, you can debate how much we want to make it easier for people to vote in different ways. We sure as hell shouldn't be taking away people's ability to vote. And that's unfortunately what we're seeing. So yes, I would encourage the business voice and because I think there's a business case for this in terms of a stable economy and a steady democracy and a place, where certain things can be counted on. So I would definitely encourage that. And, it's why I was trying to be pretty explicit about the things that I thought people could do. I'm disappointed with Senator Manchin's statement that he's not going to support For the People Act. I hope that we could see a change there. I don't know that's going to happen. I just don't know. But, I know that the business voice is incredibly powerful. As you say, we've seen it in the past. And I just encourage that. And also encourage, just take a hard look too at who is doing what behind the scenes. Because if you're trying to cover the bases and throw money, and spread things in both ways, I understand that's been the practice, but know that there are some really bad actors out there right now who do not have America's interest in mind. They have nobody's interest in mind but their own. And that is not good for this country, no matter what party you're in, ultimately.
Attorney General, if I could sort of sum up, I think, some of the messages we heard, it really focuses on building an inclusive economy that sort of reaches everybody. You spoke about gaps in wealth and wages, education. I want to hit on a question that our board chair, Micho Spring, who I know you know, a North American president of Weber Shandwick, has raised, which is the healthcare access and outcomes gaps. And can you talk about sort of your office's focus on that and ways the business community can partner on that issue?
Sure thing. I guess I'll say a few things. And great question, Micho. This is something we can actually do something about. I mean, that was what our report sort of was trying to make clear. Yes, there are these disparities. We've talked about them many times. And yes, there are some things that we can actually do that will make a difference. Number one, the studies show a more diverse workforce actually matters. We've had this conversation in the past about, the importance of representation, whether it's in the boardroom or the C-suite or in government or in politics. It matters. Seeing is believing. It also informs better policy and law. And in the healthcare space, what the studies show is when you have a diverse workforce, you're going to get more competent care. For far too long, there have been not adequate cultural competencies to mean healthcare providers, doctors, nurses, others don't always receive the kind of training that they need on understanding sort of the various cultural differences that exist out there. And with a more diverse workforce, you're addressing that. More people will come, for service, come for care, will trust their provider. And it means something, it matters. Certain things that get overlooked in Black women, for example, won't be overlooked when it comes to examinations. So that's one thing, diversifying the workforce. The other thing is data. I mean, I believe in data. I think data should drive policy. And one thing we know is that if we use that data, we can better identify and target the delivery of care. It ends up costing us so much more, all of us, if we wait till things get to the point where somebody shows up in the emergency room. I mean, the Chamber's been well-versed in these issues over the years and a strong advocate for accessible, affordable healthcare. We've got to use that data to drive more services on the front end. And speaking of services, my final point in our report is let's target resources to the things that actually inform people's health. That's why my office spent a lot of time on food insecurity. If you're not eating, if you're going hungry, there are going to be serious cognitive issues that come with that, serious issues, emotionally for kids, serious issues in terms of health outcomes. So what are some of the things? Housing security, food security, environmental pollution. What are the things we need to do, target resources with, right, that are going to lead to better health outcomes and close those gaps? And I think one of the beautiful things here about this state is between you look at the formula are just killer colleges and universities and research institutions and healthcare providers, right? And philanthropic organizations and a business community that is engaged, is making stuff happen. We can do this. We can get this done and set up a much better scenario for directly impacting and closing the racial disparities that we see when it comes to healthcare.
One of the a trend that is really accelerated during the COVID time period has been this desire by employees for greater flexibility. And now we're seeing it as we talk about returning to work and work from home and so forth. But applications of technology has also introduced opportunities for flexibility in the form of app-based work and the gig economy. And that shines a light on independent contractor laws. It shines a light on the structure of the way that we've built systems based on the traditional work economy. So, for example, our healthcare provided through the employer, our unemployment system. We built around traditional forms of work, and now we're shifting into these sort of flexible forms of work. We've advocated to change the Massachusetts law to align with the federal test on independent contractor laws. What are your thoughts on this trend of flexible work, gig economy, and specifically, are there changes needed in the law?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, Jim, and I think there are a couple topics there. I mean, it is certainly the case that COVID has forever changed the way I think as an employer about how we work. And I say as an employer, the state of Massachusetts is the employer, but I guess I'm the captain of the ship within the AG's office. And I know, for example, that through the use of technology, we have seen a tremendous ability to be extremely productive working remotely. People's productivity actually increased because they weren't spending between 2 and 4 hours a day on the road. Transportation, that's another issue we could talk about. It's been better for the environment. It's helped, I think, employees make time to be with their families, to get to that 5:30 soccer practice with their kids. A lot of positives have come from that. So we did a survey among our team, and we're currently reviewing that. But we certainly are going to allow more flexibility in terms of remote work going forward. We also want to make sure that we give our employees the time to make the childcare arrangements that they need to make. And so, I'm hoping that we roll out a new policy in the coming month or so, and we gear towards having physical, reopening in September. As I say, the office has been fully functional and open all along. But the gig economy, it grew considerably during COVID. And I think we have to really grapple with and come to terms with the fact that the nature of work has changed. Look, as the Attorney General, my job is to make sure that, among other things, consumers are protected, workers are protected, they get paid the wages they're due, working in safe workplaces and the like. But we've seen, I know, this whole growth of this independent contractor economy, the gig economy. And here's what I think. I recognize that independent contractors are an integral part of our economy, an integral part of our tech industry, and so many other spaces. And I want to be clear that our state law allows for independent contractors. It's an important business model in so many sectors. Now, we have our suit against Uber and Lyft because what we say is that this particular industry have built a business model that really is built around what we think is misclassifying drivers as independent contractors instead of employees, because we've heard too many stories of not paying into workers' compensation, not paying into unemployment insurance, people driving without car insurance, people thinking they're getting paid more than they're actually being paid. A whole host of issues specific to Uber and Lyft, and we'll see how that goes in court. It's why we've asked the court to weigh in too, because there's been this disagreement that needs resolution over who is an employee and who is an independent contractor under Massachusetts law, which is my job to enforce as Attorney General. But I want innovative companies to thrive. I just don't want that thriving and innovation to be at the exploitation, and there's a difference of workers, whether that's done under the guise of flexibility or something else. And so I think that's my general, operating principle when it comes to this space, Jim. And I continue to be open to dialogue and communication. Obviously, with the new economy and the new form of work, we're going to have to look at how our laws are currently set and whether changes need to be made. But again, I'm kind of about the basic principles: all for innovation, recognize the important role of independent contractors, just don't want people exploited. That's all.
Okay. It would not be a chamber meeting if we did not talk about transportation. Give us, I guess, an overall assessment of the sort of state of affairs in the transportation network of the Commonwealth, and particularly relate that to transportation as an equity issue.
This is not my bailiwick, all right? So I want to acknowledge that at the outset. But a few observations. I think our transportation infrastructure is lousy. I spent a lot of time driving around the state, all over the state, and whether it's broken roads or broken bridges or dilapidated, structures, it's just not where it should be, especially if you travel to other parts of the country, including other parts of the world too. We're just not where we could be. And again, that has a real effect, I think, on productivity. As I say, I didn't think about it at the time, but over the last year, what I saw was increased productivity in my office, simply in part because people were not on the road or getting up at 5 to get a bus, to get a train, to wait in line, to miss a commuter rail that didn't come, to get the next one, to be at their desk frustrated and anxious and ticked off at 8:30, expected to produce. Instead, you have people who maybe, could get up, could work out, could see the kids and be ready to go, right? Without that. And so I just saw it in terms of sort of the detriment that our current transportation infrastructure poses to productivity in this state. I think people's mental health and stress, that's a legit and real thing. I think that we need to do more. And I also think that, in this moment where we have clearly an imperative to seize this clean energy economy, making our transportation system cleaner, as well as making it more nimble and modern is imperative. And I'm not sure that the investments we've made in the past are the investments that we should be making as we go forward. And I think we've got a lot of catching up to do. So I'm in the corner of transportation is key to infrastructure. It is key to productivity. And on the issue of racial disparity, you are absolutely right in suggesting it has a huge impact. The fact of the matter is, and we saw through COVID, it was one of the reasons why I was out hammering away for community-based sites or mobile vaccine delivery options for people, because it wasn't easy for everybody to get to a train, to get to a bus, to get to to try to get to Gillette or Fenway, nor is it easy for them to get to needed healthcare or to get to a job. And for some, the wait times are just way too long. And, unfortunately, I think there's been an underinvestment in this space for a long time, and we've got a lot of catching up to do. But it seems to me we can do it. And I appreciate, the Chamber's report, the study that you all have made of what needs to happen, what could happen, we should be implementing.
On that issue of transportation and other issues you've raised, education, a lot of federal money flowing into the state. I think it's $5 billion plus at the state level. In the city of Boston, $400 million for education in the Boston public school system. A lot of discussion about how best to apply or use that money. Also some discussion about who should be in charge of it, but I'll put that aside. Thoughts on, given your comments about education, transportation, and other issues, thoughts about, what's the best way in this period of recovery to think about using the money going to the state government and maybe to some municipal governments?
No, it's a great question, and I'm not going to wade into who's in charge of the purse strings here in the allocation. I just want it to be smart. I just would say get the right stakeholders around the table, people in government at the state and local level, and people outside of government too, because we've got money coming in. How are we going to maximize the use of those funds? Where are we going to direct those funds so that we get the greatest bang for the buck, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's in transportation, whether it's in childcare infrastructure? We've got a lot of incredibly bright minds here and pragmatic people too in Massachusetts. And I think there needs to be not a siloing of discussions, but a more cohesive, what are we going to do here to make sense of this, and what do we need to invest in? I go back to basics. I do think one thing that I will continue to talk about, it's been a priority of mine since I was elected, behavioral health. Our failure to address behavioral health in this country. Yes, you've heard me on opioids and substance use disorder. It is real and significant. And there are behavioral health issues beyond substance use disorder, particularly for our young people. I think we need more investments in those, frankly. I'd like to see more investments in those when it comes particularly to education, because I think we can't begin to imagine the impact on young people's social emotional well-being over the last year. I think it's going to be easier to catch up on the ABCs than it is to address what's happened in terms of depression, anxiety, isolation, and the like. And I just hope that with money coming in, we spend more time. I mean, I remember, I won't say where I was, but hearing from the guidance counselor and the school nurse at a school I was visiting in high school, 6 months was the wait time for a young person to see a behavioral health specialist referred by the school. It's too long. It's too long. Let's be smart. And the other thing, Jim, is let's use every single dime of it, right? Yeah. We don't want to leave any money on the table. I think Massachusetts has done so much, has propelled this country forward, for centuries in so many ways, and certainly did through COVID. When you look at the likes who've left here, who are now in DC, making certain things happen, who've been on the front lines in combating this virus. Let's make sure that we are taking what's ours and making the most of it.
Well, we certainly agree with your suggestion about using this money smartly. And on many of the issues we talked about today, there's a real opportunity to affect those issues as we think about sort of coming out of this better than we went into this COVID period and this racial reckoning. So big opportunity there. And I share your hope that we apply that money very smartly. So this is a government affairs forum of the Chamber of Commerce and a great opportunity to make announcements, Attorney General. So I didn't know if there was anything on your mind that you'd like to share with the listening audience today about your future.
You can't help yourself, Jim, right? I will tell you that I'm really grateful to be doing this job. I've loved doing it since the time I got elected. It's why I ran back in 2013, 2014. We have a lot of work to do ahead. So, I'm just taking my time and taking the work in, and we'll continue to work with the teams. Most people who know me know that I tend to be impatient about certain things. I operate with a level of urgency, and wanting to see things happen. And so that's going to be my focus right now is what can we make happen? What can we make happen in the next year and a half? What can we make happen as this money, as this funding is coming through? What can we make happen as whole systems have been disrupted, destroyed, frayed, need to be built again, right? How can we do it in ways that are better, that are smarter than the way we used to do it? That gives me a lot of hope through all the madness and the devastation of this last year, Jim. I really believe that we have this tremendous opportunity right now. And with the talent, the human capital, the intellectual capital, the ethos of this state, the brand of this state, I mean, we can just take off, and I want our office to be a partner in that. I want to be a partner in that. As I say, I don't pretend to have the greatest ideas or all the ideas on all the subjects, but what I do know is that there are people in this state who have all those ideas, and we can cover those bases and we can really get some things done. So I want to thank the Chamber for its engagement and its members' engagement, as well as the work of your team. It's been a delight to work with you on a ton of policy issues, and look forward to your voice in the future.
Well, thank you, Attorney General Maura Healey, not only for your time and powerful messages today, but for all the work you do on behalf of not just the business community, but the entire Commonwealth. Before I close, I want to highlight a couple of upcoming virtual programs. We'll get back to live maybe after Labor Day, but we're still virtual now. On June 17th at 2 p.m., we'll be hosting a BEMA Summit on the future of data privacy, a very topical issue, and identity after the third-party cookie issues. And on June 23rd at 10 a.m., we'll host our next Government Affairs Forum featuring the interim mayor of the city of Boston, Kim Janey. So look forward to that conversation. You can register for these and other programs by visiting bostonchamber.com. Once again, thank you to Attorney General Maura Healey for joining us today. And thank you to our entire audience, and have a great rest of the week. Bye now.